Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much for joining today. So within the last several years, countries around the world have been releasing sustainability and energy strategies aimed at deep decarbonization to mitigate and hopefully avoid the potentially devastating impacts of climate change. Now, more than 30 countries have released hydrogen strategies and roadmaps, with hydrogen playing a significant role as a low-carbon energy storage and transportation medium with a diverse set of potential uses. In this presentation, we'll cover some hydrogen energy basics and an overview of the recently released hydrogen strategy for Canada. So let's start by looking at some hydrogen fundamentals. It's commonly found on Earth in the form of water and organic compounds. It is the lightest element, and at standard temperature and pressure, it is a gas which is 14 times less dense than air, giving it a low volumetric energy density. However, it is the highest energy per unit mass of any fuel, making it an enticing but challenging carrier of energy. Sorry, just one moment. There are some general categories which we use to characterize hydrogen by the energy source used in its production and the associated greenhouse gas emissions. Green hydrogen is produced by electrolysis of water using renewable energy sources. It represents the lowest carbon intensity, but is currently the highest cost. Nuclear hydrogen is produced by water using electricity or heat derived from nuclear reactions. This type produces low carbon intensity, but has limited availability and other challenges associated with nuclear energy. Gray hydrogen is produced from fossil fuels via methods such as steam methane reformation or pyrolysis, and yields the highest carbon intensity, but is at currently the lowest cost. Blue hydrogen is similar to gray hydrogen, but adds carbon capture and sequestration, and it is a potentially low cost and low carbon intensity pathway. So let's take a closer look at some of these production methods. First, electrolysis. So about 2/3 of Canada's electricity is produced from renewable resources, such as hydroelectricity, solar, and wind, with an additional 15% provided by nuclear energy and representing an overall low carbon intensity electric grid. In 2018, Manitoba's electricity was about 97% hydroelectric, and it was among 5 provinces with greater than 90% hydroelectric generation. Electrolysis is the process by which an electric current is passed through water, causing it to split into hydrogen and oxygen. This basic process is a common high school chemistry experiment and can achieve up to 85% overall efficiency. Typically, fresh water is required, but technology which can effectively process salt water without desalination is currently in development. The 3 most common types of electrolyzers are polymer electrolyte membrane, or PEM, alkaline, and solid oxide. These technologies differ in the electrolyte and membrane materials used, the operating conditions, such as temperature, and the suitable energy site. Next, several means to produce low carbon intensity hydrogen using fossil fuels also exist. This includes steam methane reformation, autothermal reformation, as well as pyrolysis. Steam methane reforming is commonly used in Canada today to produce hydrogen. In this process, fuel is used to provide heat to a catalytic reaction of methane and steam. The reaction produces a collection of carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and hydrogen gases known as syngas, which undergoes a further reaction to increase the proportion of hydrogen. The purifier then separates the hydrogen from the other tail gases, while unreacted methane and carbon monoxide can be reused in the process, and CO2 can be captured for sequestration. About 90% of the total carbon can be captured, but this comes at an additional cost of about 45% to the process. Autothermal reformation is a similar technology which partially oxidizes a hydrocarbon fuel feedstock to produce syngas, from which the hydrogen can be separated. It has the advantages of being faster than steam reforming with a simplified means of carbon capture, but it also produces less hydrogen per unit of fuel used. In pyrolysis, methane from natural gas or from gasification of fossil fuels or biomass is heated and split into its constituent elements, producing hydrogen and a stable carbon solid, which can be used in certain industrial processes. Keeping the carbon intensity of hydrogen production methods as low as possible is key to realizing its benefit in its effort to decarbonize. To establish what qualifies as low intensity, a benchmark rate of 91 grams of CO2 equivalent per megajoule of hydrogen produced is set based on a baseline of steam methane reformation, which is due to its widespread use today, is considered the best available technology. The threshold to be labeled as low carbon intensity is then set at 60% fewer emissions than this benchmark, allowing any means which can produce hydrogen at or below 36 grams of CO2 equivalent per megajoule to be qualified. Now, the Canadian federal government has recently released the hydrogen strategy for Canada in December of 2020, and this is after 3 years of engagement between some 1,500 different stakeholders, representing the private sector, industry, Indigenous and non-governmental organizations, along with all levels of government. As part of the strategy, several actions for the near term were suggested to kickstart the hydrogen economy. The first is to establish hubs to showcase mature applications and encourage development of demonstration projects. The upcoming federal Clean Fuel Standard will begin to introduce regulation for producers to reduce the carbon intensity of liquid fuels produced in Canada over time. It will offer incentives for development and adoption of clean fuel technologies. And the last action was the development of new government policy and regulation needed to enable growth and adoption of hydrogen into the national energy strategy and achieve the goal of net zero emissions by 2050. Initially, there will be a period of growth and diversification until about 2030, when hydrogen would be expected to represent 6% of Canada's end-use energy, and a solid regulatory framework would have been laid for the next phase of rapid growth and adoption. If deployed in a transformative way across all sectors of the economy, by 2050, hydrogen is a key enabler of net zero emissions, representing 30% of Canada's energy end use and more than and replacing more than 50% of natural gas energy. This will provide 190 megatons of CO2 equivalent per year, as well as direct revenue of $50 billion and some 350,000 jobs across Canada. The national strategy outlines a true transformation of Canada's energy sector as it sees hydrogen to grow and become a substantial proportion of the nation's energy profile, alongside significantly increased proportions of electricity and biofuel consumption, while natural gas and other fossil fuels are greatly reduced. Under the Paris Agreement, Canada had previously committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 30% below 2005 levels by the year 2030. It was recently announced that this reduction target will likely be revised to 40 to 45% below 2005 levels. Low carbon intensity hydrogen can help achieve these targets by addressing energy uses where other options like direct electrification may not be technically feasible or economically favorable. Such applications include transportation, heat for industry and buildings, heat and power in remote communities, and energy storage. The magnitude of Canada's greenhouse gas challenge, based on the 2018 emission levels, is to reduce from 729 megatons of CO2 equivalent produced every year to net zero by 2050. In this graph, a transformative level of hydrogen adoption and integration is planned as part of the reduction strategy. Hydrogen represents about 20% of the reductions targeted by 2030 and 28% of the further reductions between 2030 and 2050. Low carbon intensity hydrogen can be produced using a variety of energy sources, including fossil fuels, biomass, renewables, nuclear, and the grid. Pyrolysis and gasification are shown below the low carbon threshold and are joined by steam methane reforming so long as substantial carbon capture and sequestration is implemented. The strategy notes that since low carbon intensity is key to achieving greenhouse gas reductions, that any government investment in new hydrogen production from fossil fuels should initially require at least 50% carbon capture and sequestration and move up to 90% or greater by 2030. This chart shows some projections for the cost of hydrogen using steam methane reformation with and without carbon sequestration, as well as from electrolysis using either renewable or grid electricity. price of hydrogen generated with renewables is expected to decrease substantially over time and become competitive with hydrogen produced from fossil fuels around the year 2030. As mentioned, hydrogen has a diverse set of potential applications. Fuel cells can be used in vehicles as well as for stationary electric power generation and cogeneration of heat and power. Hydrogen can be used for heating in buildings and industrial processes by being burned directly or as a blend with natural gas. And lastly, hydrogen remains an important feedstock for industrial processes and products such as fertilizer, steel, and synthetic fuels. Hydrogen production is particularly attractive in provinces with large proportions of renewable electricity, such as BC, Manitoba, Quebec, Newfoundland, and Labrador. Alberta and Saskatchewan are noted as having primarily fossil fuel-based hydrogen production potential, with carbon capture and sequestration being a key enabler. Ontario, the Northern Territories, and Maritime provinces all possess production potential from a mixed set of energy resources, including nuclear, renewables, and fossil fuels. The hydrogen strategy identified many potential end uses, depending on the regional resource availability, geography, climate, and existing infrastructure. For Manitoba, mining and heavy-duty transport are identified as having the most potential, but we could also envision use for light-duty vehicles, space and water heating for buildings, as well as combined heat and power for remote communities. Hydrogen can be used either as a blend with natural gas or as a full replacement for gas. When pure hydrogen is burned, it produces primarily water vapor with no carbon emissions and minimal other combustion byproducts. However, many challenges to its use still exist. For example, existing natural gas pipeline infrastructure can generally support a blend of up to 20% hydrogen by volume, though the lower volumetric energy density of hydrogen also requires potential flow and pressure changes throughout the pipeline network and for downstream equipment. New pipelines can utilize materials which mitigate the issue of embrittlement, which is present in older infrastructure. This allows for 100% hydrogen to be used, but the availability of suitable heating equipment, such as boilers and furnaces designed for hydrogen, also becomes an issue. The hydrogen strategy stakeholder engagement identified 9 current hydrogen blending projects being developed by utilities around Canada, but much wider adoption is needed. By 2050, when deployed at full scale, it is expected that hydrogen could make up a large majority of the fuel in the gas network used for heating. Heating is expected to be over 50% of the demand for hydrogen and account for 30% of the overall 190 megatons of CO2 reduction potential. In addition to the technical challenges of using hydrogen for heating, there's also the challenge of cost competitiveness with other energy sources. By 2050, the strategy forecasts the cost of hydrogen in Canada to be between $1.5 and $3.5 per kilogram, which equates to approximately $11 to $25 per gigajoule, compared to $5 to $18 per gigajoule for natural gas. However, if the carbon emissions of natural gas are offset by direct air capture, the relative price shifts considerably, and hydrogen produced at the lower end of its price range will be equal to or cheaper than the alternatives. A common aspect of the hydrogen development strategy among many nations, including Canada, is the initiation of technology hubs, such as located at areas such as ports. These hubs would concentrate access to and deployment of hydrogen for both cross-sector and international collaborations, as well as being centers for research and development. Canada has been involved in fuel cell technology for over 40 years, with over 80% of applications worldwide using some aspect of Canadian technology. The Canadian government seeks to maintain and grow this competitive edge in technology and innovation by supporting development in strategic areas and using research to inform the creation of new regulation, codes, and standards. With the global market for hydrogen estimated at between $2.5 and $11.7 trillion by 2050, there is a very large financial incentive to establish and maintain a leadership position in hydrogen technology and the supply chain. Currently, the challenges for development include a decline in research, increased competition from larger countries with significant financial investments, and a need for more deployments and demonstration projects. The strategy outlines 8 strategic pillars for hydrogen in Canada. The first is to build strategic partnerships, leveraging existing relationships as well as building new ones to grow the hydrogen economy. Secondly is to encourage growth by de-risking investments. This is accomplished through government funding and long-term policies. Innovation is supported through targeted research and development, building on Canada's existing technology and intellectual property strengths. A robust framework for this rapidly growing industry is needed, so existing regulations must be modernized while also introducing new codes and standards to facilitate deployment and adoption. To support regulation, clear and actionable hydrogen and clean energy policies should be developed by all levels of government. Public awareness is key to widespread acceptance and uptake, so government should encourage and lead by example. Recognizing the different challenges and opportunities exist for the country, around the country, regional blueprints are necessary to provide tailored hydrogen solutions. And lastly, recognizing that climate change is a global issue, we need to leverage international cooperation to ensure the global push for clean fuels includes hydrogen. So in summary, the hydrogen strategy for Canada lays out an ambitious roadmap for hydrogen to play a key role in reaching net zero emissions by 2050. It can be produced from a variety of energy sources to serve as a versatile energy carrier and clean fuel for many different applications. Thanks very much. And I'd be happy to take any questions after the presentations. I'll pass it off to Erin.
All right, thanks, Lindsay. So let me get my presentation up and running here. All right, thank you for the introduction earlier, Laura and Lindsay as well. I'm Erin Cooke, the project manager for bus electrification at Winnipeg Transit. I also chair the Canadian Urban Transit Research and Innovation Center's Zero Emission Bus Committee, and I am a participant in the Canadian Hydrogen Fuel Cell Association's Urban Transit Task Force, which is a strategic initiative associated with NRCan's hydrogen strategy. So Winnipeg Transit, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is the largest transit agency in Manitoba, and but by Canadian standards, we're considered a medium-sized transit agency. We have 640 buses, which are predominantly 40-foot buses with a few 60s and 40s as well. We do all of our maintenance in-house. We support 3 properties, transit garages distributed across the city. And we support ridership of about just under 170,000 passengers per day, pre-COVID numbers, of course. So we have a history of electrification dating back to the 1930s. We had a very robust trolley network that was eventually phased out as diesel buses became more prominent. In the mid 2000s and late 2000s, the city of Winnipeg developed its first climate action plans, setting emission targets for various sectors across the city, and included some targets around vehicles, both transit and personal use vehicles. But at the time, there wasn't really that many options beyond trolley. We did a cost analysis at that time, and it was just too expensive to revert back to the lines, overhead lines and whatnot to support that. It just wasn't cost effective for the amount of GHG reductions that we were getting. And then in the later 2000s, 2010s, the battery electric bus technology really started to take off. So Winnipeg Transit participated in a number of projects between 2014 and 2018 with both Manitoba Hydro and New Flyer. And we ran a bus on regular service between 2016 and 2018 with en route charging. The bus is charged at the airport about 5 to 10 minutes. Or up to 20, depending on how the chargers were working on any given day. But those buses were demo buses that basically we leased them and they reverted back to New Flyer at the end of the trial. The technology used in those were very, very prototype early. The buses were not really ready to go into regular service at the end of that time. But the technology continued to advance after that. And we undertook a new study to see how the technology had advanced in the most recent years and to see how we could best integrate the technology into our fleet today. So this culminated in our release of our technology evaluation report that came out in February, where we looked at the economic, technical, and environmental impact of zero emission fleet. And we'll go through some of the outcomes from this today. And now we're currently working on our rollout plan and how to transition our fleet, including a replacement schedule, infrastructure development, new garages, and workforce training to support the transition. So for those of you who are not that familiar with buses, there's three main types of buses. You have rapid charge and long range battery electric buses. And the main difference between those is the types of batteries that are on the bus. The rapid charge buses can charge very quickly, but don't carry a lot of energy. So they will charge multiple times throughout the day, operating about 2 hours at a time. And that's what Winnipeg tested during our pilot. Long range buses have the batteries charge very slowly over 3 to 4 hours, but those buses can be deployed for 10 to 15 hours at a time. And then the newer types of fuel cell buses, which are not a pure hydrogen fuel cell bus, but they're actually a hybrid battery electric bus. They now contain a fuel cell that's used as an onboard charger for batteries. So they contain about as much energy as a rapid charge bus, but also have a fuel cell so that they don't have to charge throughout the day. They basically charge continually while driving. And then the other advancements that's coming along with battery electric is a whole different range of size and shapes of buses that are available in battery electric format in North America that weren't previously available. So the main difference between, as I talked about with the fuel cell and the battery electric, pure traditional battery electric, is how they're refueled. So a battery electric buses has charging, which is either via a plug or overhead charge rails. And they contain a diesel auxiliary heater just because batteries don't really generate any heat. Whereas a battery or fuel cell battery electric bus is refueled with hydrogen, has a fill panel on the side, tanks on the roof, a fuel cell in the engine compartment with cooling system to maintain the temperature of the fuel cell. But you can also capture the waste heat from the fuel cell to help heat the bus. So when we started our analysis, we started out by looking to make sure that all of the technologies that we were looking at were going to be green. So everybody knows that buses from a tailpoint standpoint are zero emission, but there's been a lot of talk on how dirty batteries are. So I dug a little bit deeper and to do a full life cycle analysis of the vehicles, including the manufacturing, production of the batteries, the fuel cell, and their life cycle, recycling, recyclability, et cetera. And while they did have about a 2 to 2.5 year more impact on the production side, that the life cycle emissions more than paid for that, with all the buses surpassing diesel after just a return on investment of about 2 years. I'll dig a little bit more into the pathways around hydrogen specifically, because there are various options that were available with that technology. So as Lindsay touched on earlier, there's a multitude of colors of hydrogen available. Not all are readily available to Manitoba. So gray, as he talked on, which could be from non-renewable natural gas. We don't produce in Manitoba today. So if we were to use this as a pathway, it would have to be imported from Alberta or Ontario. Not readily available, but we did look at its impact. Blue hydrogen, again, is in discussions right now, but it's not even really commercially available. There's various trials underway for carbon capture and sequestering in Saskatchewan and Alberta, but most of them are pretty preliminary and there isn't really a lot available for export. And green hydrogen was really the way to go in Manitoba. Our grid electricity is greater than 99% clean, but it does tend to be more expensive than the blue or gray options. But it's something that we could look at and produce here ourselves fairly quickly without having to rely on any other projects to support us. The other interesting thing in Manitoba is byproduct hydrogen, which is not actually a color because it varies widely based on how it's produced. But Manitoba actually has the world's largest sodium chlorate production facility in Brandon, which produces sodium chlorate as a byproduct. Produces hydrogen as a byproduct of water electrolysis of sodium chloride. They produce about 18,000 tons a year. which is, quite significant, but there's significant developments that need to be done in order to remove the hydrochloric acid from the hydrogen that's produced. And a portion of it is recycled into their current production today. So development, this is sort of on the market, but it's also recently been development rights acquired by a company that's developing a hydrogen engine out in BC. So why would anyone consider gray or green, or gray or blue over green? Cost is obviously the major thing. So blue or gray is, around $1.50 to $2 to produce, whereas green electricity can vary from $4 to as high as $16 by province. But even gray hydrogen has significant environmental improvements over diesel or CNG, depending on which province you live in. Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Nova Scotia have pretty dirty grids right now. So even using gray hydrogen could be, at least equal to diesel today, or potentially even better than what they have. And then if you can get blue or green, it makes substantial improvements. So gray is seen more as a transitional fuel that will be more in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Nova Scotia, and sort of as a temporary measure as green production scales up. So in Manitoba specifically, we reviewed what our options were. Electricity being clean was definitely our best option. The other feedstocks considered were SMR, but again, we don't really have our own natural gas here. So using SMR and plus the electricity needed to produce it wasn't really ideal. Renewable natural gas is just sort of starting to have some discussion in Manitoba. There's some very small projects that were previously done with water and waste, but there is currently some studies being done around capturing landfill gas or expanding the water and waste capture, and potentially commercializing that. And renewable natural gas as a feedstock for SMR can actually be net negative in some situations, or as pretty close to green hydrogen in terms of total carbon intensity. It's a little bit difficult in how it's assessed, but basically, the methane has about a 25 times more greater impact on global emissions. So if you're turning that into CO2, that you're actually reducing more emissions than you're producing. And then an industrial byproduct hydrogen that we talked about, but it's here, but it's not currently available for vehicles. We actually also looked at where the fuel would be coming from and the impact of trucking would have on all of it, and evaluated that way. So what we found was, even if we were trucking CNG formed hydrogen from greater than 500 kilometers away, we were still getting about a 50 to 60% reduction in overall emissions, but all of our other pathways were better. And ultimately, byproduct hydrogen and green hydrogen produced from grid energy produce reductions of about 90 to 92% lower than our diesel fuel today. And if you have on-site production, you don't have any delivery distances, but ultimately delivery distance doesn't really have very much overall impact in your savings. It has some, but the goal is obviously to find a source that's within approximately 100 kilometers of our use. So why did we ultimately decide to go with hydrogen in our trial when most places aren't? Most people study and look at the technical issues with the performance of the buses, the cost. We know that the labor is going to have to transition, and those are the things that people can easily understand. But when you undertake a feasibility study on actually integrating these buses into your fleet, you start to understand the impact that infrastructure really starts to play on your decisions. So, how are you going to charge these buses if there's a power outage? What does your grid mix look like? Do you have enough power at your sites? How are you going to prevent large demand spikes? And then how scalable is this? Or how many chargers are you buying? Is it one charger for every bus or one for every 3 buses? How much space does that take up? And does that mean less buses in your fleet or more buses in your fleet? So all of these are things that we reviewed, and which led us to see that a mixed fleet is really going to be necessary to meet all the needs of Winnipeg Transit and maintaining our service levels going forward. So diesel zero emission buses are not a one-for-one replacement for diesel buses in all applications, despite some people will tell you that they are. But each technology has pros and cons and trade-offs that will have to be considered as we scale up. And the advantages of the depot charging, you can send them out for a long time so they can work on your high frequency service. You don't have to worry about charging them every 2 hours, but their range is not really long enough to meet those routes that we have that are, you know, greater than 300 or 400 kilometers. Buses having to be out for, we have some routes that are as long as 26 hours. They're relatively inexpensive though, which is why those are probably going to make it the majority of our fleet. The en route chargers, they have to charge every 2 hours, so you can't, and for 5 to 10 minutes at a time. So it's difficult to schedule high frequency service around those buses. If a charger goes down, it's problematic. If there's a backlog of buses waiting for chargers, we miss our schedule. But they can be deployed for a long time. So these might have a route or might find a place in our community service where we could accommodate charging for long periods of time, or potentially on some of our 60-foot routes on weekends or things like that where service levels aren't as high. They do require more battery replacements, and they do tend to be sort of middle of the pack cost-wise. Fuel cell buses have the advantage that they can run for about 20 hours a day, no issues, very long routes, and don't have to come back to charge. So they meet all of our requirements, but they are the most expensive option today, just because of fuel cost. Technology cost on the capital side is starting to reach parity with battery electric. And at scale, all of the options end up being very similar cost-wise. And that's really, fuel cell buses could end up being the most expensive or the least expensive option, depending on the cost of fuel. Capital costs are actually lower with fuel cell buses as you get to scale, because you can plan your infrastructure based on projected fleet size. So you're building a filling station today, another one 10 years from now. Whereas with battery electric buses, you're buying a bus and a charger with every procurement. The one major advantage in Manitoba is actually we have the lowest cost commercial electricity rates in the country, even lower than Quebec on the commercial side, which means we can actually produce on-site hydrogen for around $3 a kg. When you factor in CapEx costs, it gets around $4 a kg, and that's with on-site production. But to get delivered fuel is going to be higher than that, and that's the challenge that is really facing us for growth. So the reason we need hydrogen that's delivered is because of power. So currently our fleet estimates are that to convert our entire fleet of 640 buses to battery electric or fuel cell electric with on-site production of fuel would require 18 to 22 megawatts of power. Our current facilities have 3 megawatts of power. So, you know, the province produces a ton of electricity, but the infrastructure in the city of Winnipeg is very, very old. And our garages are currently in older parts of the city that have not received new upgrades from hydro in probably, 80 plus years. So there's going to be a huge cost associated with increasing our current power requirements at our facilities or building new garages and finding locations that have this amount of power. If you can get delivered hydrogen, you basically only have to run the dispensers and compression pumps, and you need about 1 megawatt of power. So we could electrify all of our fleet with no need to add backup power resiliency, no new generators, and in all of our existing facilities if we had a source of hydrogen available for delivery today with green or low to no carbon emissions. So why hydrogen on a performance standpoint we touched on earlier. You know, the infrastructure scalability, fuel cell buses touch all of those. You can fill a bus in 5 to 10 minutes versus charging for 3 to 4 hours. The buses can run for 20 hours. So we don't have to worry about swapping buses every 10 minutes. We don't have to change the way we do scheduling today. The lower infrastructure cost at scale. We have low backup power requirements. I said our generators today would be more than sufficient to run the compressors and dispensers. And we have backup resiliency built in through on-site storage. So if there is a power outage, we can just continue to pump the hydrogen and not have to reduce our service levels. So the only real advantage that battery electric buses have is operational costs today. So why are most agencies not looking at fuel cell buses? It comes down to pilot cost. Most transit agencies don't look at what their full fleet costs are going to be to transition their entire fleet. They're looking at how much is it going to cost to put 20 buses or less on the road. And fuel cell buses are the most expensive option by a considerable margin. You know, $23 million more than just buying a diesel bus today, and $10 million more than the lowest cost battery electric option. So that's why you tend to see much more cities going with battery electric and en route charging as pilots. Despite the fact when you hear comments from them is that they don't really like the technology. There's complexities with it, but it does have those cost advantages that your cities are looking at. The other problem is availability of delivered fuel. Lots of people don't have space to be able to put hydrogen production equipment on their sites. They may not have zoning requirements to do so. So they go to battery electric buses. We did the controversial thing and actually picked the most expensive option, which is a mixed fleet. Because we really feel that a mixed fleet is going to be necessary, and we want to ensure that we've trialed and tested all of our options. So there's various options for hydrogen fueling, for gaseous delivery, which is for low investment, low cost, but it only supports, you know, initial pilots. Liquid delivery is something for commercial, which is really what we're looking to grow to. But on-site production is what we ended up with today, more out of necessity than requirement. So we are going to be putting an electrolyzer on our site. So this requires about 3,000 square feet of space on our parking lot, and we'll be producing somewhere between 400 to 500 kgs per day, and using 4,000 to 5,000 liters of water, with a projected cost between 5 and 7 million, depending on how we scale up our hydrogen. And then we also project costs somewhere between $4.50 and $5.50 per kg. We have the advantage of no time of use demand charges here, so we can basically run the equipment 24/7 and produce more fuel on the weekends to support higher usage on weekdays. And we feel this station can probably support up to about a 30 bus fleet. So opportunities and challenges with scaling up for hydrogen. On-site production of hydrogen is cost competitive with diesel today, but large-scale hydrogen production delivered is needed to prevent those high energy spikes, power demand footprint going forward. So on-site production is really a temporary measure in hopes of expansion of larger production. Low bus infrastructure capital costs as we scale up is great, but again, delivered fuel is needed. Funding is available to offset the capital costs. Public transit has advantage of getting about 30 cents on the dollar for all of our capital costs through current funding initiatives, which does help make the cost of hydrogen much more competitive for us compared to commercial operations. But the volume of fuel that transit uses is pretty small, and we need to look for partners through municipalities, trucking, utility companies, gas projects for heating, various things that will help bring those volumes up and really entice people to invest in the province of Manitoba. So yeah, so there's a number of things that have to be developed to support not just transit electrification, but buildings that will be needed to be near zero to support these buses going forward. And there's a lot of discussion that needs to be going on with the province to get this going. So we are currently projecting our growth for our fleet is going to be fairly standard, with most of our buses being transitioned between 40s to 60s and 30s going forward. And our slow path to zero emission right now takes us to 2045. We're also investigating ways to scale this up and accelerate this if necessary, if we had the funding to do so. And we're currently projecting, based purely on the economics right now, that fuel cell buses would be about 30% of our fleet, and battery electric buses 70%. But this is subject to change depending on how our trial goes and how the cost of hydrogen really goes going forward. So that's a summary. I want to leave some questions time for questions here. So went through a little bit quickly, but look forward to answering any questions that you have.
Thanks so much, Erin. So if you just want to stop sharing your screen there, and Lindsay, if you just want to hop here, I see you back on. Excellent. Here we are. Welcome, everyone. All right. So we do have one question in the chat to start off with. And so it's from Ken. So Erin, have you had the chance to read the report released this month by Toronto Transit Commission about preliminary results of TTC's evaluation of electric buses from New Flyer, Proterra, and BYD? If so, what do you think of their evaluation? And
I sure did. Yeah, I said I had a little bit of inside information on that from my time working at New Flyer. But yeah, it matched everything that we were expecting based on what I've heard in the background in industry. There's the length of buses, the weight of buses, the power. TTC actually rolled out their zero emission bus project with not really much planning. They got a bunch of money, they jumped on it. And so now they're doing the planning because they're discovering all the things that we basically have identified here now. How do you back up these buses with power? So yeah, I definitely did see that. They are also somebody who is discussing hydrogen now for a lot of these power reasons. Their garages, I think their garages tend to be a little bit smaller than ours. They have more of them, but they've identified also that 25 megawatt power requirement, which is extremely difficult to get in Toronto. They've actually come up with a pretty creative way to get around that, which is a P3 partnership, trying to get the Ontario Power and Toronto Hydro to pay for all of their chargers and power management. And then going sort of what the European model is, that you just pay a kilowatt hour price of electricity. We're looking to see if that's an option that we can do here as well. And we're constantly in discussions with both options for managing the power for battery electric and also trying to find new sources of hydrogen. So.
well, thank you. So we have another question for Lindsay. So blue hydrogen depends largely on CCNS. It seems that this is still experimental and its ability to sequester CO2 over the long term is questionable. Where is the current state of that at?
Yeah, so first I should admit I'm not an expert on carbon capture and storage by any means, so I'm actually not familiar with the current technology or state-of-the-art technology is. And my understanding is similar to yours, Kurt, that this is still in development and somewhat experimental, though there are a number of promising pilot scale projects underway. I don't know if Erin, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I know like there is a project underway in Saskatchewan regarding it, and I know it is applied in a few projects in Alberta directly related to the production of oil and gas, but nothing on the commercial side right now to actually at the volumes required to export. They're all sort of in development for specific use cases right now. The Transition Accelerator in Alberta is involved in a few projects, and specifically around a study in Edmonton in order to use blue hydrogen, but they basically got funding for a study right now, not necessarily for the commercial application of it yet. So it's coming, but yeah, it's still sort of at the experimental stage right now.
Okay, thank you. So next question, can either of today's excellent presenters, and I have to agree with that, say when you think Manitoba will have the capacity to export greener hydrogen?
Well, we technically have the capacity to export today. It's just not developed. So, like I said, the location in Brandon is basically venting hydrogen into the atmosphere today. So, if we wanted to develop that, we don't even have to invest in really any major infrastructure upgrades. Just that a will to develop it is there. There's several other projects that are in development here that are in the planning stages, which I don't really want to disclose, but there's definitely interest in exporting it. But right now there hasn't been a hydrogen strategy developed by the province of Manitoba that's really kickstarting the economy here. So I feel with Winnipeg Transit coming online, there'll be a lot more interest in that. There's definitely interest right now in the forklift industry in terms of, if we have extra hydrogen, is that something we can test out? There's definitely projects that could be spurred by having a source of hydrogen here. So it's coming. I think the closest pathway right now in terms of outside of ourselves, there is the RNG source that could be used for SMR. Right now, the city is just sort of exploring options for commercializing that as a product. So.
All right, the next question. Edmonton seems to be leading transit electrification. Are they using fuel cell / electric or battery electric?
Complicated question. They have gone battery electric. They're in the same boat as we are. They built a brand new garage and only have 2 megawatts of power supplying it. So they're in the process of already having to pay massive infrastructure increases to try to expand their fleet there. They can support about 60 electric buses. They have 40 today. So they are looking at maxing out the most they can support in that facility. But to grow beyond that, they are going to have to build a new garage or transition to fuel cell or en route charging. The mayor of Edmonton has suddenly come on board as pro-hydrogen in the last month, probably. So transit has not really been told that they're going battery electric, but the mayor is announcing that they are. So to be determined. You're muted.
Just to clarify, sorry about that. Did the research on electrification include consultation on their experience? And if so, what were your findings on Edmonton?
We do have open discussions with multiple transit agencies, but we did not directly consult with them as their project was not really online when we started our study. But they actually based their study off the outcomes from Winnipeg Transit. Like I said, Winnipeg Transit ran our buses for 4 years and accumulated close to, well, 2 of the buses had close to 90,000 kilometers each. The other 2 had about 40 to 60. So we didn't consult with them directly, but we did ask for their opinion on a few things related to infrastructure. But we do have ongoing discussions and a monthly meeting with all of the mid-sized transit agencies in Canada that are currently pursuing electric buses so that we can share best practice amongst each other, which does include Edmonton.
All right, so there has been large-scale deployment of electric buses in cities in China, including Winnipeg's sister city, Chengdu. Have you been in contact with any Chinese transit authorities and/or bus manufacturers to see what lessons they have learned that are relevant to Winnipeg?
No, we are not in discussion with them. I did watch a very great video on it from Charged EVs that did outline it. China has the advantage of having infinite money to spend. They did have an interesting model that I've never seen in Canada, which is basically a more like a distributed depot system. So rather than en route charging, they basically put a ton of depots all over the city that support 30 to 40 buses each. Which is not something that can directly apply to Winnipeg. Trying to find land for that would be challenging. But yeah, they have definitely done a great model, and I would love to see that display panel they have that monitors all their bus status. Would be fantastic. So we're hoping to improve our data from that. But like I said, BYD, we've not really even specifically spoken with them too much. We haven't got a whole lot of support from them on our project at this point. We do get excellent support from, Proterra and New Flyer in terms of, supporting information for us. Yeah, we're always open to hearing input from that.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for all of those questions and all of the knowledge and answers that are shared. I'll just give it one more shot to see if anybody has any questions that they're just feeling a little nervous about asking. And then otherwise, if there's none, that will be our time. So I don't see any coming in. So if you're in the middle of writing, maybe just like quickly pop off your mute button. And so, yeah, there are definitely hydrogen strategies elsewhere in Canada that people can consult. So there's one in BC that's very good, as well as Ontario. So, all right, well, since there's no more questions, unless there's any final comments that either of you want to make, Lindsay or Erin.
I would just encourage everyone who's interested to take a look at the actual federal strategy document. It has a lot of information, great stuff that I didn't cover at all for sake of time, but definitely check it out if you're interested.
Yeah, that's good advice. Looking at the federal strategy is a nice idea. And so anything from you, Erin, that you want to say as last word?
Yeah, if anyone has interest in hydrogen, like I said, there's a lot of initiatives that are going on between the Canadian Hydrogen Fuel Cell Council Association, and the NRCan strategy. And they always want to know who's interested. They keep logs of who's talking about it and create initiatives around that. Their strategies for cities specifically, their strategy for vehicles. So it's always good to know who has an interest out there so that that initiatives and money can be directed appropriately. There's a lot of great opportunities here specifically around green hydrogen. And I said that it's trying to get that interest from the province, I think, is going to be key to getting some of this kickstarted and knowing that people in the province are interested in it.
Mm-hmm. Yes. All right. Some good advice. Read the strategy. Make sure people know that you're interested, because people can't act on things they don't know about. So with that, I'd just like to say a huge thank you to Erin, to Lindsay, and to all of you for taking the time today to watch this and listen and acquire some new knowledge. So we'll see you guys again before too long. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.